we're back. It's been a while, but we're back. This is my little corner of the internet where I like to give teachers a space to vent, to rant, to find some community in the struggles that we go through and some community in all the amazing things that we go through. And it's been a minute. Like I said, it's been a minute since I've been here. This year started off pretty rough for a myriad of reasons, most of them being personal endeavors and personal expectations and personal pressures I put on myself. But we're going to get into that because this episode is about what it's like to be a teacher who has autism, okay? And it's not something that I always feel comfortable talking about. It's not something that lots of people feel comfortable hearing. It's not like an easy conversation to have, especially with like the current state of the world. And I think that's all the more reason to talk about it because I think what we don't necessarily talk about in teaching all the time is teachers who are neurodivergent, right? Like I think there's a big hole in the conversation about these teachers, and I think there's a lot of us out there who are struggling with some form of neurodivergence, right? And I think the one thing that I think is clear with all teachers is that I think to be a teacher, you probably have some level of anxiety, right? Whether it's like generalized, whether it's like the day before school starts, whether it's like while you're teaching class, I think there is some sense of anxiety there. Anxiety isn't necessarily neurodivergent, but it is something that does come into play with like our mental health and things like that. So while this conversation that I'm going to have is mostly about like my personal struggles and my personal brain and how it works, there's also a lot of overlap with a bunch of different teachers and a bunch of different things that kind of exist and happen, right? So that's what today's going to be about. I think this could probably easily be like the thing I talk about forever as a teacher, because like I said, there's kind of like a market for it. There's not anyone who's out there doing it, and there's not a lot of people who are out there talking about it. So I think that this is a good time. This is a good place to do it. So if you are one of those neurodivergent teachers that don't get a lot of attention because of, there not being really like a place for you to exist on the internet, welcome. It's safe here, I promise. So to catch you guys up a little bit, I don't want to disappoint like my fan that's continuously watching all of these episodes and my videos and podcasts and listening to all of them. But basically this year's been rough. It's, I started at a brand new job. I'm still in special education. So there's a lot of anxieties and pressures that come with that, as opposed to like when I taught, general education, different pressures, different responsibilities. Not to say that one's harder than the other, but definitely different. And with all of that comes just like a lot of pressure to do well and succeed and all of these things that I put on myself, right? On top of that, I'm finishing up my grad school program that I've talked about on this podcast before, and this is my final year, so I'm doing like my internship basically for counseling. So basically I'm doing my final stages of becoming a counselor and getting my license. So imagine like doing student teaching, right? Like while you're a full-time teacher, and that's kind of what's happening right now. Not doing it perfectly. Lots of things in my brain that like make me feel like I'm not doing very well with it, but we're doing it. We're making it through. It's basically like a day-to-day process at this point. There's never any semblance of security or safety or confidence in the way that I'm doing things, but we are slowly doing them. So that's a lot of the reason why I haven't had a chance to like pop on here and record. That's why I haven't posted a lot of videos. That's why I've been like kind of absent from the internet, is because I've really been trying to have the time that I have for myself and not necessarily force myself to do something that I'm not always comfortable with. And I think that comes with the conversation that we're going to have today, because in order for me to like be the person I need to be and like exist in the spaces that I need to exist in, like I need to also have time away from like putting on this mask, right? That's like, yeah, let's talk about teaching. Let's talk about all these things. Let's like be a teacher. Let's, have all this patience in the world for kids. And I just can't do that all the time for a lot of different reasons. And it's harder for me than other people because of the fact that I have this diagnosis, right? And I think that's the best place to start, is how I stumbled into this diagnosis. And I say stumbled because I'm 31 years old. I was diagnosed when I was 29, so we're coming up on my 2-year anniversary of my diagnosis. It was November 2023 is when I got officially diagnosed. And I think I knew before that, and I think a lot of neurodivergent people kind of know something's a little off before that. And I worked with a lot of therapists before. I say a lot, but it was really only like 2 or 3. And through all that like self-work, what I discovered is like late 2023 is when I finally decided to be like, okay, let's figure this out. Let's get down to this. And like I paid for a psychological assessment. I took a day off of work for it, which was like a really big deal to me at the time of my career, which was, year 8 of my teaching career, which, as we know, did not end well. Year 8 did not end well for me. And if you're a longtime fan, longtime follower, then you know that my 8th year of teaching was not one that I look back on super fondly, but it was one that was super important. And this is one of the reasons why, and I've mentioned why before, right? Like this diagnosis really led me to rethink a lot of the place in this world, right? Like this place in my career, like this place in that school specifically, and there's a whole lot of reasons why, and I can get into some of those, but again, this could be like an eight part series at this point. So as we're getting into it, like basically my teaching career started, I was 21 years old when I got my first teaching job. I decided to get my license in special education, so I did a lot of work with, disabilities and the ways brain works and like behavioral things, and that was kind of like part of my background when I first got into teaching. So as I started doing it and getting more into it, that was like a big backbone to like where my teaching came from. And a lot of it also was social emotional based, as I talked about with like, restorative practices trainings and like circle time that I've talked about. And basically what that led to was me just like being really in tune with things, right? I think when I talk about some of the like, pieces about being autistic, there's this big piece of like empathy and like understanding. And basically it was like when I turned 25, and this was probably my 4th, 5th, 6th year of teaching. I don't remember when it was. It was right around 2020, right around 2021 is when I really started to realize that like something is different. And it's not that I haven't known my entire life that something was like a little off with the way I like interact and the way that I like view the world. But it wasn't until like truly like I turned 25, 26 where my frontal lobe like truly started developing, and I just was realizing that it's like, oh, fuck, like not everybody sees the world this way. Like not everybody struggles with these things, right? And there were moments with like kids that I would teach that I would be like, oh, wait, like I do that. And sometimes, when you're teaching like kids in general education who have a diagnosis of autism, and you're kind of like seeing yourself in them. I remember specifically there is this one kid, and it was 20 whatever. I'm not gonna even pretend to guess or pretend to know. He was a 6th grader, and he was one that like kind of latched on to me pretty quickly. And this is when I was teaching like my social emotional class. We would do a lot of like circle time. We would do a lot of like emotional vocabulary. We would do a lot of like community service projects. And he walked in one day. It was after lunch. My class was after lunch. He walked in and he was clearly not having a good day, and I like keyed into it like pretty instantaneously, where I was like, hey, that kid's not having a good day, don't pressure him to do anything. Like it just kind of like clicked, right? And I went up to him and I was like, hey dude, like how's it going? Do you need anything? I can tell something's a little off, just let me know if you need anything. Wasn't any pressure, wasn't anything like that. And he's like, I'm okay, like I'm fine, like don't worry. And I was like, okay, well just let me know, okay? And I got class started. He kind of put his head down, and eventually he got up, and he just started like following me around the room, right? And he's a little 6th grader, so think like just a little guy. And he just started like following me around the room in a way that I was like, okay, so what's going on? I noticed it, but I didn't acknowledge it until other kids started to see it and other people started to notice. And I was like, hey dude, what's going on? Do you need something? And he's like, no. And I was like, are you sure? Like, I can sit down with you if you want. He's like, no, I'm okay. And he was just like, he kept just like following me around, and like, not like super closely. He was like a foot or two behind, but close enough for me to realize that it's like, okay, he's finding some sense of like comfort and stability here, but he can't necessarily voice it or anything like that, right? And I was like, I remember doing something very similar when I was a kid, and not necessarily to a teacher, but it was like just kind of like being in the space that I felt like comfortable and safe. And that was a moment where I was like, I know exactly what he's doing. I know exactly what I'm providing for him, and I know exactly why his brain feels like he needs that. And it was in that moment that I was like, why do I understand him so well? Like, what is going on? And on top of other moments where when I was a kid, I used to like have these moments where I would just like, it would build like the pressure and the emotion would just like build up so much that I would have like breakdowns, right? Like I would start screaming, and I would get like violent almost, right? Certain times. And, on top of like those things with like siblings, and on top of like just not being able to like really connect with people. And I think there's a lot of different reasons for all of these things. But, I've known for a long time. I'm even doing it now. If you guys are watching any of my videos, like you can see that I struggle really hard with like staring at the right place, or putting my eyes in eye contact, right? Like I've noticed that for a really long time. There was this girl I was dating in high school, and I didn't know what color her eyes were. and we dated for a while, and I like still to this day could not tell you the color of her eyes. And it's not that I didn't know her, it's not that I didn't, converse and empathize with her and like get close to her or whatever, but it was just like this fact that it's like, I don't know this one thing about you, and apparently that's a big deal, right? And it's because I never made eye contact with people, right? And I think it was hard for me as a kid to form connections with people. It was hard for me to make friends, still hard for me to make friends, where I have trouble like initiating social things like that. I have trouble like getting out of my comfort zone and things like that. And once, I think the final straw on the camel's back or whatever they say, right? And I don't understand idioms. Like, what the hell? What do you mean? I'm not putting any straws on camels, but whatever. The whole thing here is like, it was that one moment that I was like, shit, like, I understand this kid so well, and he has this diagnosis. Maybe I should look more into it, because at that point I had been getting to this point in my life where it's like, I got to figure this out, because I'm 25 years old and I am far more confused about who I am and where I'm going and what I'm doing than I should be. And that was kind of the clicking moment for me. So I went in to get evaluated, and I told the what is it called? Like the office, that I wanted to get evaluated for like either ADHD or autism. And I was like, yeah, I just want to know, because I know something's not right. Like, I have the background in education. Like, I know something's just like a little off, and not to say that there's something wrong with me or whatever, or not to say that I couldn't continue, but it was just something that I needed an answer for it. Right. And turns out that's a symptom of autism as well. It's like needing to know certain things. Anyway, so I walked in, and it was on day one. She kind of like, I remember the psychologist, we kind of had a conversation. She's like, so what brings you in? And we were kind of like talking about all these different things, about how like when I was a kid, like I couldn't wear jeans because I thought they were uncomfortable. Like, I didn't learn how to tie my shoes until 7th grade because I couldn't get like the motor skills of it all, right? Like, I used to have really bad temper tantrums when I was a kid. I was super stubborn. Like, people couldn't get me to do anything I want, like anything they wanted me to do if I didn't want to do it. And I would hyperfixate on video games. I remember like printing out strategy guides from like the internet, and I would highlight it and I would read it, and I would read the booklets that came with the little PlayStation discs and the Nintendo discs, and I would just like hyperfixate on these things. And I have a vivid memory in 4th grade of when I was like putting mail in the mailboxes, and all I could think about was going home and playing video games and not talking to anyone because I didn't want to do it anymore. And I have memories of like lying to friends over the phone because I didn't want to go out and socialize with them because it felt too heavy. And I have all these different memories of just like, it was glaring me right in the face. And my parents didn't know enough when I was a kid to like know that was a thing. Society didn't really know, right? They were just like, oh yeah, he's like a quiet, anxious genius. And I was like, okay, there's got to be more to it than that. So basically I explained all that to her, and she's like, so you we don't have to worry about doing an ADHD test. And I was like, oh, so it's that obvious, is it? And she was like, no. I just think like the problems you're describing more closely aligned to. And I was like, girl, like you don't have to lie to me like that. So I went in to do the test. We did a bunch of tests, and basically she was watching me the whole time. We did like a bunch of like mind puzzles. We did some like brain things. We did some like motor skills. We did, like conversations. I did like a bunch of screeners, and it was like 4 or 5 hours, and I kind of enjoyed it, to be honest. Like, I was like, cool, this is awesome. And a couple weeks later, after she like went through all the results and things, she gave me a printout that I still literally have sitting in my email, just in case I need to show somebody or see it or look through it and like reconfirm my identity as this who I am, right? And first thing she said, it was like, and I was like, just tell me, like, I don't want to beat around the bush. She was like, yes, so you have autism. And I was like, thank God, because if I had done all that and it turns out that I don't, what then I would need to know like what the fuck is wrong with me, because it's like I think what I was waiting for was an answer, and I'm glad that the answer happened. So she went through the results, she kind of explained like what pointed to what, and she also kind of mentioned that my IQ is pretty high, and that like a lot of the boredom that I was talking about in school kind of stems from like being gifted. And I was in like honor classes, and I was in all these things as a kid. I didn't really try. Like, I was like, oh, school's really easy. Like, no one really has to try in high school up until they graduate, right? And turns out, like, that's not true. Now that I'm a teacher, like, turns out that's not true. Lots of kids struggle with school. It just was not me. And so she identified me. There was this one test that we did about, like, processing. There's a bunch of tests we did about, like, processing speed. And when when she explained the results to me, there was like this decoding thing, and I remember you had to like memorize, not memorize, but you had to like look at this list of symbols, and like each letter represented a different symbol, and then you would have to discover which one was wrong with it, and then you'd have to like mismatch like the symbol to the number and make sure you like write the code correctly, and then like also notice any mistakes. That could have been two different tests that I just merged into one. Hello, I just moved my mic. I'm so sorry. It could have been two different tests that I molded into one, but it was basically this idea of like processing information as it comes. And she was telling me during my evaluation meeting that she was like, I have never seen literally anybody do it as fast as you did and how accurately as you did. So in this information processing piece of your intelligence, I was like 99.9 percentile of this one test, this one aspect of my intelligence. And she was like, so you're gifted, you're twice exceptional. And I was like, okay, so not only is like one thing wrong with me, but I'm also like too smart for anyone to like really understand what I'm saying, or like for me to even, keep up with the world at a regular pace. My brain is just like moving and processing things like so quickly that I can't even like sit still on a thing, right? And so then we kind of talked about some resources and things like that, about what to do. And there's a lot. There's a lot of things to do with that. And that's kind of like the process of how I got diagnosed. It was like $2,000 that I paid to go through that process. Over time, I eventually got it paid back through health insurance, which was really cool. So just so you know, if you're looking into a process like that, like it is a long process and it is worth it, especially if you're concerned about something like being a little bit wrong. So this is your sign. If you're listening to this, this is your sign to like go and do the thing, like go get tested, go get answers, because once I figured it out, like I can't tell you how much more made sense to me, not only like looking back on my life, but also like how I deal with things now. And I'm still very much working on like being patient with myself and with the world and with how I approach things. And that's kind of where this next conversation is going to come. But it's enlightening really to like finally be able to point to something and say like, oh, that's why I'm like this. And it's a constant struggle. It's a constant struggle, right? Like, because autism technically is a disability, but I feel there's this like mismatch between like, because I don't really feel disabled, because I know there are people who struggle with autism like at a higher level, like how they would describe it as I'm like a level 1 autistic. You have like level 2, level 3. Listen to a lot of podcasts about autism. I'm, on all these different things and posts about what it means and how to do it, because it's hard. It takes like a community, and like every day is challenging, right? So when I learned this, it was finally something in my life that like kind of clicked, and that's what eventually led me, like I said at the beginning, I kind of alluded to it, and what I've talked about before is that knowing all of this, right? Like the struggles that I was having in my job and my teaching job of like burnout and like hyper focusing on like doing a good job, and like hyper focusing on like why I'm not fitting in, and like hyper focusing on like why people can't see how hard I'm working all the time. All of those were literally symptoms of my autism, right? Like of my neurological developmental disorder, right? Like the reason why I struggled so much at my first teaching job was because I was a kid. I started that job when I was 21 years old, and they threw me into it. I didn't know I was autistic, and I just thought that everyone experienced this. I thought that everyone was super burnt out all the time. I thought that everyone didn't know how to talk to their bosses and coworkers and peers, and I thought everyone kind of like felt this like hyperfixation on their job and like had to do all these things. And I think in teaching there's more of that, but like the way that I experienced it was not that way. So when it came to a point of like, I physically cannot work in this building anymore because nobody understands what I'm bringing. Nobody understands the value that I have here. Nobody understands how hard I'm working. I don't fit in here regardless of what I try to do and who I try to be and how vulnerable I'm being. Because if I feel like I'm being vulnerable and no one else sees it, then I'm not being as vulnerable as they need me to be or want me to be. And for me, that's just like not possible, because the way that autism works is it's like I can take off the mask and I can show people who I really am, but then they still don't want to connect because there still is a disconnect there. Like I'm still that person, right? So I don't know if any of that made sense, but the idea was, in my old job, I struggled so much with like opening up to people and being vulnerable and showing them who I am outside of all these things I work to do, that when it finally came time for me to be like, yes, this is vulnerable to me, but nobody else saw it that way. They just saw it as like, oh, that's just Kassick, right? And when it came to the point of my 8th year, and it happened, some sort of fate intervention, right? Like my 8th year, I get diagnosed in November, and then by the time April, May rolls around, like I'm quitting my job because I was sitting in that meeting, and I've talked about this before on this podcast and to many other people, but I've had this conversation before of like, when it got to that point of me like wanting to quit and knowing I needed to quit, I said in my head, I was like, if I didn't get diagnosed with autism, then there is no way that I would have quit right now. There's no way I would be in this position, because I would have worked hard to fix it. But it came to this point in that meeting, and I remember it vividly. I was sitting there in the meeting, and I remember vividly thinking, it's like, they're never going to understand me. They're never going to understand what I'm working for. They're never going to understand the goals that I have, and we're never going to see eye to eye because of this new thing that I have. And I had told one of them a few weeks prior because of another incident that happened, and I was just like, you're never going to get it. I'm never going to get it. This is never going to be worth it. So I quit. Thanks so much for the past 8 years. Peace out. See you later. And all of that was because of the way that I decided that my autism was the way that kind of led me out and led me to this new direction, right? All that to say, there are a lot of impacts that kind of have stemmed from that, and that's kind of just like the background, right? So it's about 21 minutes in. I feel like I want to keep talking about this, but I don't know even like where to begin. So I guess some of the things that I think need like a voice in this conversation is like some of the things that make it hard, right? And I found a couple of quotations that I wanted to talk about here. Like, I don't have notes because I don't know, I kind of just wanted to get on here and talk about what it was like and like be vulnerable about what autism shows up like in teaching and kind of some of that burnout that it leads to. But I'm also open to conversations and questions. So if you have any of that you want to share, like, please drop it in the comments, drop a review, slide into my DMs. You know about those. They're wide open. So yeah, so let me know. But here's some things that kind of happen, right? So I think particularly with the story I just told about me wanting to quit my job, that school, they told me a lot of different things, right? I think one of the most specific ones about like rules, right? They would often tell me that, hey, like, kids can't come to you during class if they need anything. Like, they can't come get snacks. They can't like come cry in there. Like, they can't be in there if they need you. Like, they can't, like, they need to be in class. And that was a rule. It made sense. It's like, okay, kids need to be in class. Like, I'm totally on board with that, but you're limiting their access to me. You're not letting them have lunch in my room. You're not letting them come in and like exist in their space that is safe for them. You're not letting them come and get snacks that I would like provide. Like, it wasn't even the school's anything, right? So I understood the rule, right? But this quote that I found was, I'll just read it. It says, "The thing with neurodivergent folk and rules is that if they don't understand why a rule exists, they will not follow it ever." I understood why the rule exists. I did follow it, okay? They will listen politely while being told the rule, but then will immediately ignore it because they perceive it as nonsense. Exactly. It's nonsensical that a kid can't come to my room when they're distressed. A kid can't come to my room when they are hungry because they need a snack. A kid can't come to my room to eat lunch in a safe place that's not a crowded cafeteria. If anyone understands that, I do, because I get hella overstimulated. And they won't argue. They will just not follow the rule unless it is fully explained so that they do understand why it exists. No one ever told me why. They just said kids need to be in class. And I was like, that's not enough for me. I need more than that. And even when I reached out and I was like, I need to understand more about these things, that no one would tell me, right? So what I did is I just like blindly did my own thing. There was this like saying, it wasn't really a rule. There was this saying that kind of happened in my early teaching career that was like, shut the door and teach. And basically what that means, it's like, hey, kind of ignore everything. You know what the fuck you're doing, so stand in your room and do the thing, right? And I kind of took that literally sometimes, where it's like other teachers and administrators would tell me something and they wouldn't explain it well enough to me. I didn't agree with it. I understood it. I feel like I understood it. But the way that I just didn't agree with it, that I just like would do whatever the fuck I wanted, right? Like, I would take kids out of class to get snacks. I would pull them into my room if they were struggling with something. Like, I would let them have the space that they needed because someone said that they couldn't, and that didn't make any sense to me. And it's very like justice driven. It's very like that autistic like rule following thing where it's like, I don't fucking get it, and I'm not going to follow it because I don't agree with it, and I just don't get it. Like, if you explained it to me and gave me a valid reason, like, sure, fine, whatever. But nobody was able to do that, right? So then the last thing, on the flip side, if they do understand a rule, they'll be completely enraged that no one else is following the clear instructions. They follow it scrupulously, and so should everyone else. There is no middle ground. This is the other thing that pissed me off, because I would, even if I did understand the rule, like, hey, no kids in there during lunch, don't pass out snacks, don't let kids come to you. But then I would look down the hall and I would see 3 or 4 fucking other teachers doing that same ass thing. And I was like, okay, I have to follow the rule, but they fucking don't. And that would piss me off, because there was teachers that were doing the same shit as me. And a lot of teachers would say this after the fact, right? Like, after I quit, they'd be like, hey, yeah, like, I'm doing the same shit as you. Why am I not getting the heat for it? And if I could explain that to you, I would, but I can't. So the thing that like really pissed me off, and this is at my old job. This isn't necessarily now. This is my old job. And I understood the rule, but no one else was following it. No one else was doing it. No one else was being told to follow it. And the fact that that just added more and more and more to my burnout. That when I read this post, I don't remember where it was, probably on Instagram. When I read this post, I was like, this exactly explains what it's like to be a neurodivergent teacher within an educational setting that just does not fucking get it. And that was the piece that really clicked, where I was like, what the hell? Like, this is not a thing that should be existing, because they don't understand. No one understands that they're not following the rules, and that pisses me off, because I'm being told to follow the rules and I'm getting written up for it, but nobody else is doing it. Like, nobody else is following it, and they don't get in any trouble. So nobody else followed the instructions, and they deserve to, right? And this is an example of why it should have been so clear to me. And when I looking back, it's like, that's exactly what was happening inside my brain. Like, I was getting burnt out because of the fact that there was this like injustice kind of involved within the system that I was working in, where I was getting in trouble. I was getting the forefront of all this drama and all these different rules that I kind of understood, sure, but then like everyone else was being told the same thing, but they weren't following it. And then it's like, if they don't have to follow it, why do I have to follow it? Why am I getting written up for it when they're not? So that's one of the things that are a struggle in teaching, is I really need people to explain rules to me. I really need people to explain expectations to me, and I truly need to understand them. And then I also need to understand that everyone else is following them, because if I look down the hall and someone isn't doing it, that's going to send me into a spiral. Okay. And now that I know this about myself, I'm able to like advocate for it. I'm able to see it when it happens, and I'm able to understand what happens in my brain when things like this happen. But it's that like sense of justice and injustice that like really is a struggle for me. And reading this kind of really made it safe to do that, right? And I mentioned the other piece of, you know, that journey of like me discovering that I'm autistic. The other part of it was like, every time I would go into an office, or every time I would talk to somebody about like, I'm struggling, I'm feeling burnt out, nobody is getting the value that I'm bringing, nobody is seeing what I'm bringing to the school. That was the point that like really struck with me first, is like, I'm working so damn hard all the time, and I feel so damn tired all the time, and nobody is seeing the hard work I'm putting in. And the thing that they would say is like, hey, well, be vulnerable, be open, like explain people, like show people who you are. That's how you that's how you become a leader. That's how you are shown value, is like showing people like who you are. And that's when it kind of opened up like a little bit of a crisis for me, right? Because I think I mentioned, it's like, I was trying to be vulnerable. I was being open with who I am to people. I was kind of showing them the things I care about and the things I want to do, and like my hyperfixations on like speech and debate, for example, on like lesson planning, on making sure I'm doing a good job for the kids and like their social emotional needs. Like, I hyperfixated to the end of the earth on these things in teaching, right? And I tried to show that to people, and they just like didn't care. And I think that's where it comes in, because there's also this piece of being autistic where you're like showing like this mask to kind of fit in. So when I realized that like people weren't really connecting with that, I would like put on a front, and I would be like, yeah, I'm like the super fun, happy all the time. Like, let's put puns on my walls. Like, let's decorate my room. Like, let's make sure, you know, I'm doing all the things that I'm supposed to do. Like, I put on a front, like when I would walk into school, when I would round other teachers, and kids would even see it, because I was able to be myself, like in front of the class, in front of the classroom with kids in the room, as a coach, as a teacher, as a whatever, right? Like, I was able to be myself with the kids. But the second another adult walked in that room, like, I turned into a totally different person, and they didn't really know who I was, and they didn't really see that version of me, because I would immediately put on a mask. Like, it's crazy. And if you're watching this on somewhere, that you'll be able to see what I'm about to do. But basically, a person would walk in, and I know my voice is going to change, but so I'm teaching my class. I'm like, hey, everyone, like, let's go ahead and get out our notebooks. Like, let's get started. Thanks so much for being here. Super proud of you. Awesome job. Hey, knock it off, whatever. And then a person would walk in and be like, hey, like, how are you? Like, what's going on? What's up? What do you need? And it just like turned into something. And then immediately when they left, like, I would be all smiles, be like, oh my God, yeah, no, like, that's crazy. Like, yeah, super cool. Like, how are you? Like, what's going on? And then immediately my face would just go like completely blank. And a kid would be like, what the hell? Why were you faking? And I was like, oh, did you like see that I turn on like my customer service voice? And they were like, yeah, that was crazy. And I was like, it's easier to do that. And you know, before I knew that I was autistic, I was like, oh, everyone does that. Like, everyone's fake, right? And it's not even that I'm like being fake, right? and that's like the deal with like masking. And I think that's the hard part in teaching too, where it's like, it's not that I'm being fake. It's really not that I'm being fake. It's just not always safe. And that's what the second quote is, right? It says, "No one knows who I am because it's never been safe to show anything other than a character, like a puppet." And that came from an autistic podcast that I listened to. The podcast itself isn't autistic. The podcast is about autism, and it's run by a woman who's autistic. So it's not an autistic, you know what I mean? Anyway, I have autism, I'm sorry. And it's this idea of nobody really knows who I am because it's not safe enough all the time to show who you are, because people are going to like either push you away or not understand you or whatever else, right? Like criticize you or whatever, or, you know, at worst case scenario, like put you in a home, you know, like, so it comes to a point too where you're masking so hard that it's like you don't even know who you are. And I think that's the piece too that makes it challenging to like be vulnerable, because it's like, who am I outside of this mask, right? And for the past 2 years since my diagnosis, I've been like kind of working on that and discovering like, okay, like if I've been putting on a mask for 29 years of my life, like who am I actually, right? Like who can I be? Who am I? Who have I been? And I think that's a hard piece too, of like rediscovering myself in like new positions and rediscovering myself as like a counselor. And it's like there's a lot of insecurities that come with that. One thing I remember specifically about entering counseling school is when we had to do like, I think I talked about this a little bit. We have to go into the school and like practice being a counselor. They call it like intensives, and they call it like labs, where we're like kind of going in and like practicing being a counselor. And the first thing they said on day one in my class, like before leading up to it, they're like, eye contact is huge in counseling. Like you have to be okay with like making sure people feel safe in eye contact. And I remember going into labs and into these intensive and like for a week. And I remember sitting there and I was like, I'm not going to be able to pass this because I physically cannot make eye contact with people. And I remember talking about it in front of everyone, and everyone was like, you're still able to like create a sense of safety. And there's even another participant in the class that said like, I feel like I could tell you anything. And it's in those moments, right, where it's like my own doubt and my own insecurity from masking for so long and from like putting on a front all the time that kind of make it okay. And it's really interesting the way that I have become the teacher I've become, because when people are in my room, or when kids talk about me, or when kids are drawn to me, or all these different things, it's always like, oh, Mr. Kassick, like he's my favorite teacher, like for all these different reasons. Like he's super fun and cool, and like he gives me the space to like exist and breathe and like not feel the pressure, and he's nice, and he's like all these different things. And to balance that then to say like, oh, but I'm also autistic, like it feels, even in my own head, right, and I'm the one doing it, like it even feels in my head that that's a mismatch, that I shouldn't be able to do those things. And that's the piece sometimes that I like get really, it's hard. And I don't know what else to like say about it other than the fact that it's my own dichotomy that I'm dealing with, but it's also like the dichotomy of everyone else, like seeing this version of me that I don't even know that I am, or know how to be, or can be, or know when to turn it on. I just like kind of go in and like in front of the kids, I can be myself. But then the second somebody asks me about it, it's like, I don't know, just like be yourself. Right. And I think all of these things are why it's hard for me to like take up leadership roles sometimes, because it's harder for me to be honest and open as a teacher to other teachers than it is in front of the classroom. And I think that's one of the other things that I struggle with a lot. Right. I feel like I'm getting to a good stopping point, but I know there's other things to say. So this is going to be like a part one of God knows how many, because I know in my head right now there's a bunch of different things, but I feel like I'm hitting a wall with like where this conversation is going, and I feel like it's rounded off pretty well. So with that, come back for the second part. This is going to be a longer conversation. I'm happy to open the door for more conversation about neurodivergent teachers, because again, I feel like the path is not well laid for us, and I want to kind of bridge that a little bit. And I have a lot of things to say. I have a whole book about it. If you want it published, then hit me up, follow me, like and subscribe, all that shit. And I'll see you in the next one, hopefully. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super proud of you. And okay. Okay. See you later. Okay. Bye.